Let's now talk about how we are going to diagnose a patient with DIC. What are the important clinical features to look for, and what are the labs that we have to follow to make a diagnosis? And then further on, what are the differential diagnoses to keep in mind? The important clinical features is there is widespread microvascular thrombi. So these thrombi formation, it can form in any organ, and depending on the organ it is forming, there is a clinical features or the clinical deposition. Along with that, there is a bleeding tendency. Bleeding can be from any orifice. It can be an internal bleed as well, which is basically evident by anemia or rapidly developing swelling or any, depending on where the person is bleeding. The signs and symptoms are dependent on the organ. So if there is bleeding into the brain or there is a thrombus formation in the brain, it can lead to stroke, it can lead to seizures and even coma and death, which is very serious. So brain is very important. If there are small vascular thrombi obstructing the blood supply to the renal system, there is mild azotemia or renal failure. It can even progress to acute renal failure or permanent widespread acute renal failure. The patient can go very quickly from a normal functioning kidney to an acute renal shutdown, and that can be life-threatening. Any symptom of DIC is life-threatening. DIC itself is a medical emergency, and you have to act very quickly and to diagnose this condition and then treat whatever is causing whatever is the underlying pathology. It can also involve the respiratory tree leading to the ARDS, and ARDS itself can also cause DIC. So there is a paradox. DIC can activate the ARDS, and ARDS, especially after the pancreatitis or any sepsis, it can lead to further DIC aggravation. So if someone has an acute or an active ulcer, it can bleed profusely. And bleeding diathesis can affect any organ. It can be a cerebral hemorrhage. They can present as ecchymosis. It can present as hematuria in the renal system. So these are the common clinical features. Basically, you can bleed from any place or you can form clot in any place. So if both of these pictures are present in a patient, you should have DIC very high up in your differential diagnosis. What are the labs that we are going to follow? How do the labs help us? Because DIC affects all the systems, there will be a widespread array of labs. In a lot of hematological problems, there is only one or two labs that is abnormal and the others are fine. But in DIC, you're going to have widespread lab abnormalities. So the platelet count is generally low in fully developed DIC. This is because the platelets are being consumed in forming these thrombi. So the platelet count can be very low in the 50s or in the low hundreds, or it can be even less than 50 if the patient is bleeding profusely. Prothrombin time will be elevated because of the consumption of factor 7 and the other factors. There will be an increase in the APTT or the activated partial thromboplastin time, fibrin degradation products or the fibrin split products, and fibrinogen. The fibrin degradation products is the most important test or the most sensitive test for DIC, and this is the one which we are going to follow. It also includes D-dimer studies. So whenever we have a patient which we have diagnosed with for DIC with all of these labs, then we start treating them, and then in the follow-up of the patient, the one lab which we always look for is the fibrin degradation product. How is it responding? And that correlates with the patient prognosis. If the fibrin degradation product level is going down or the FSP level is going down, then that means that the patient is improving. Fibrinogen will be low because it is being consumed in all of this coagulation cascade. Along with that, the antithrombin level can also be low. It is an antithrombus, and so because of widespread thrombi formation, the level of antithrombin 3 generally goes down. It can be about 60 to 70% of the normal level. So these are the important lab changes. The important one to remember are the FTPs and the D-dimer studies. And all the other types of lab abnormalities can easily be explained based on the basic pathophysiology understanding. If you understand what is the basic problem in DIC, you are going to make up these labs by their own. This all makes sense. This is all because of widespread activation, and whenever there is widespread activation, there is consumption of all the platelets and the various types of coagulants, and that leads to their abnormal labs. We have a DIC scoring system called an overt DIC scoring system, and this is used to basically assess the risk. So what happens is we start off by asking the question, does the patient have an underlying disorder known to be associated with overt DIC? Underlying disorders, just as we talked about in the causes section, can be a sepsis, can be an underlying malignancy, or can be a snake bite, can be trauma, or an obstructive complication. If we do not have over an underlying disorder, then we do not use this algorithm. This algorithm is basically used if we have an underlying disorder. So if we do not have that underlying disorder, we do not use this algorithm. But if the patient has an underlying disorder, then how do we proceed? We order a global coagulation test profile with the platelet count, PT, fibrinogen, and the fibrin degradation products. And then we score the various factors based on the labs we have. So if the platelet count is greater than 100, then that is a 0 score. That is a favorable figure, which this is the place where we want to have. But if it is less than 100 and greater than 50, then we give a 1 score to that platelet count. And if it is less than 50, then we give 2 score. Similarly, if we have an elevated FTP or FSP level, if there is no increase, if the FTP is normal, there is a 0 score. But if there is a moderate increase, we give them 2 points. And if there is a strong increase, we give the 3 points. If the PT is prolonged by greater than 3 seconds, we give them 0 score. But if it is prolonged by greater than 3 but less than 6 seconds, then there is 1 point for that. And if it is elevated by greater than 6 seconds, we give them 2 points. And similarly, if the fibrinogen level is less than 1, then there is 1 point for that. If it is greater than 1, then it is normal and there is no point. So based on all of these labs, we add the score, and if the final score is more than and equal to 5, then that basically reinforces our belief that this patient has an overt DIC. If the score is less than 5, then there's a suggestion of a non-overt or non-apparent. Overt DIC means very apparent or clinically evident DIC. But if the score is less than 5, then there is less chance that this patient has DIC. One important thing to consider is that a few people, DIC can present as a chronic disorder, especially if they have an underlying malignancy. And in that patients, there is with a slow growing tumor, there is a slow release of the tissue plasma origin activating factors and the other factors which are being secreted. So the clinical picture is not very acute as normally for DIC. So they can have a chronic, slow progression of symptoms leading to DIC. In these patients, most of the labs will be normal apart from the fibrinogen degradation products or D dimers. That will always be abnormal. And then we follow these patients with FTP levels, serial FTP and serial D dimer levels to look for what is going on in these patients. So that should also be kept in mind. Chronic DIC secondary to malignancy, especially. This is how we score DIC or assess the risk factors. Now let's talk about what are the differential diagnoses. You have a very high suspicion that this patient has DIC. What are the other things that you should also consider, and how do you differentiate it? Any type of severe liver disease, chronic liver disease, or CLD, or severe cirrhosis can also present with a similar picture to DIC. This is because a lot of coagulation factors are being produced into by the liver. So if the liver is abnormal, these factors will be deficient, so there will be bleeding, widespread bleeding, and that can present clinically similar to a DIC. But how do we differentiate is that in a patient with a severe liver disease, that develops very slowly, generally over a period of months to years. But DIC presents very quickly. And secondary, the patient with the severe liver disease will have all the other manifestations of liver abnormalities. He will have an abnormal liver functional test, abnormal LFT profile. He can have cirrhosis. He can have ascites or various portal hypertension. So these factors clinically help us distinguishing chronic severe liver disease from a DIC. Along with that, certain types of microangiopathic disorders like microvascular disorders like TTP, HUS, thrombotic thrombocytopenic purpura, they can also present with clinical pictures very similar to DIC. But in these patients, the PT-APTT levels will be normal. There is no coagulation abnormality. It is just the platelet microthrombi which are being formed here, and that can lead to thrombocytopenia and types of hemolysis found out in TTP especially. So the coagulation factors and the PT-APTT levels help us in distinguishing the microangiopathic disorders from the various types, from the DIC, which we talked about today. And certain types of novel immune therapies which are being tried out, the monoclonal antibodies, the various types of recombinant drugs which are being used to treat the rheumatological disorders, immunological disorders, the various types of cancers. They can also lead to a development of DIC-like picture, especially if they are used long term. So that's why it is very important, if we do not have an apparent cause or an apparent underlying abnormality in a patient which presents with DIC, to have a good pharmacological history. And it is always very important to ask the patient on which drugs she is using, medicines he's on, or look into the previous treatment regimens that the patient has been exposed to in the past. And that can give us an answer of the development of DAC. So these were the important differential diagnoses that we have to keep in mind when we're talking about the DAC.